Today we are talking about mages. More specifically, we're talking about mage builds. There was a recent high-risk post, or rather a Smite Pro post, about the recommendations of various Smite Pro players when it comes to playing mages, whatever mage you should pick up first and all that kind of stuff. I might address that as a whole in a later video, but today we're talking about one specific part. And that was the recommended core items, or the best items for mages at this point. And I will just read out what the different mid laners recommended in terms of builds and kinda let you determine based on that which items might be good. Wolfie, Penetration Boots, Warlock Sash, Book of the Dead. Yaman, a safe build is Sash, Penetration Boots, Book of Thoth, and then Book of the Dead. Hurry Wind, Warlock Staff, cooldown of Penetration Boots, Book of Thoth, Book of the Dead. Zeros, Boots, Warlock Staff, Book of Thoth, Book of the Dead. Baskin, Mage's Blessing, Warlock Staff, Boots, Book of Thoth, Obsidian Shard, Book of the Dead. Sell Mage's Blessing for Chronos Pendant. Pretty Prime. Full build would be Boots, Warlock Sash, Book of Thoth, Chronos Pendant, Book of the Dead, and Obsidian Shard or Divine Ruin. Venenu, Warlock Sash, Penetration Boots, Book of Thoth. Hopefully you figured by now that there's a very obvious build path among all mid laners at this point. To the extent that the only outliers really are those who are going into lifesteal with Bancroft's Tail in combination with Typhoon's Fang. That's another interaction that's just very, very strong on certain lifesteal oriented gods, but maybe not the norm for everyone. Outside of that, on pretty much every mage you'll have a start with Mage's Blessing, Tier 1 Warlock Staff, then you finish your Boots, you finish Warlock Staff, you go into Book of Thoth, or maybe Book of the Dead first if you want a lot of survivability, you maybe get some penetration in between. I think Spear of the Magus, but it's a little bit underrated here in this context because I think it's really good on some mages as well, but otherwise Obsidian Shard. And then at that point, if you haven't built it yet, you have your Book of the Dead, and then you have whatever situational items you want to slap in there. And that's just all you need to build on any damage ability focused mage that doesn't have lifesteal in his kit. I briefly touched upon this topic already when we were talking about Warlock Staff earlier in the season, a few videos ago, where I said that Warlock Staff is very bloated in terms of its stats now, and that it's gonna give a lot of mages a lot of early survivability. But it actually has developed further than that. I mentioned that build there as one option for some mages. As it stands right now, it seems to be the cookie cutter build for pretty much any mage out there, if you're not completely going off the meta and have a very specific reason to go for something else. Obviously, there are flex options, for example, gods that benefit from Gem of Isolation and may want to switch out one of the items or something like that. But often enough, you will still have at least Warlock Staff, Book of Thoth, and Book of the Dead anyways. And I personally think that this is problematic to the point that mages have the single biggest issues in terms of building right now. I know some of you are going to be upset over that, saying, hey, mages have been weaker for a season, they need those buffs, otherwise, they can't do anything at all anyways. But I think it's not the way that mages were intended to be played and not the way that mages should develop into in the longer run. The first thing you have to keep in mind is that mages not only have these new item paths, but they also have different stats. All mages have stacking physical and magical defense now, meaning that they will have a decent amount of protection at the end of the game. And mages were always intended to be the squishy class, and mages were always intended to burst other mages with some exceptions as well. This does no longer work. The best gods against mages right now won't be assassins, it won't be mages, with some outliers obviously in both cases. Generally, it will actually be hunters. It will be hunters that can invest into a little bit of flat penetration to get through those base defenses and then are able to build kin size. Until this patch, Deathbringer was so overwhelmingly strong that it didn't really matter that much. Hunters would crit for so much that they were by far the most dominant force out there, but that's no longer the case. Crit is in a more balanced place than before. It is not super balanced yet, and we'll see more changes, but it's definitely not something that will run over any mage anymore, and kin size will be the option against high amounts of health stacking. Now, the other problem that comes with that is that this build doesn't revolve entirely around health either. And if you have less health, Kins deals less damage than before now. That's something we have to keep in mind if we look at what's happening in this build. We'll look at these stats a little bit and then we'll talk a bit more about that. So we take a level 15 Ra, that's about time where you can have this build somewhat finished. If you didn't build any pen in between and you built that afterwards, whatever, doesn't really matter. Level 20 Ra would buff the stats even more, but even the level 15 stats are somewhat ridiculous already. That level 15 Ra will have no power before building any power items. He will have 1405 health and he will have 975 mana. Those are the base stats, 1400 health. Yeah, you know, that's something most assassins can relatively easily go through. But then we add Warlock Staff, which is just a very good item in terms of its stats now. Once Warlock Staff is fully stacked, it will have 135 power. That is a really high value of power for a single item already. No need to talk about that any further. Anything beyond 80 power is a high power item basically. And this is far beyond 80 power actually. So this is one of the strongest power items that you have that is not conditional in regards to when it works with that power, unlike Bancroft's. Then you get 600 health, so we are 2005 health now, and you also get another 400 mana. That already makes you pretty tanky as a mage. It doesn't make you insanely tanky, you're 2000-ish health. That's something you can work with. Then you get Book of Thoth. It has another 100 power right off the bat, no HP, and 875 mana when stacked. We'll add the extra power at the end. And then you had Book of the Dead. Another 100 power, so all three items have a very high amount of power. Another 200 HP, not quite as crazy as Warlock's, but it's still extra HP. And another 200 mana. That doesn't even require stacking, so at this point your Thoth is probably at least halfway done. You'll have a lot of mana from that, and then your Book of the Dead is done and you just stack up the rest through a few kills, a few minion waves. Doesn't really matter much. So in total at this point, before all the multipliers, you have 335 power. With the passive of Book of Thoth, that's 408.5 power. A very high value for that early into the game, something you typically try and achieve through Rod of Tahuti in earlier times, which is just not as good of an item anymore. Then you have 2205 HP. In regards to Concise, that's not too bad. You'll roughly take 4% damage until you're at 2000 health, and then the damage already goes down. That's just one or two basics that are affected, and afterwards you take the 3%, which is less than last season. You also have 2450 mana. That's the last edition. But the interesting thing is that Book of the Dead will give you a shield equal to 25% of your current mana when you are at half health. By the time you have Book of Thoth, you should be around full mana most of the time. Not exactly full mana, but if you lose a lot of mana, it's usually just if you really spam your abilities, you stick around 60 to 80% depending on the mage, especially in combination with Mage's Blessing. So let's just assume the worst or the best and say we have the full mana for the shield, which would add up to roughly 600 health. Or let's assume that the case is a little bit worse for you and you get another 500 health as a shield, not as health. And this is important, this is not a heal, this is a shield. A shield that lasts 6 seconds, meaning it can't easily just be waited out, because by that time your cooldowns are probably up again and you can just run over the enemy. So, this shield procs at 1102 health, meaning that Concise already deals less damage and the extra shield doesn't even affect Concise effect, so all the way through you will only get 3% damage from Concise. And your total health is somewhere around 2700 to 2800. And that is before protections, meaning that you also have to include the reduction that, once again, with mages having both kinds of protection to a decent amount now, will chunk away a decent amount of the damage that is coming to you. That means that realistically, in 4 items, including your boots, excluding the starter, you will have around 400 power and more than 3000 effective health in both regards in most situations. Now try to figure out how many assassins, how many mages have burst enough to go through that in one ability rotation and actually kill someone with their abilities. Spoilers, there's probably none. With a lot of basic attack thrown in, you're not even gonna get close to that amount of health and that amount of protection until very, very late into the game, way beyond the amount of items that the mage has to build for that. You can literally, and I am predicting that that will happen at some point, throw in a protection item as last slot or even build a Height of the Urchin somewhere in between, and you will be almost unkillable as a mage while still dealing ridiculous amounts of damage. The best way to counter that will currently be mages that have a massive amount of lifesteal, because they force you into an anti-lifesteal item at least, or they will just outtrade you in the long run as long as they have some survivability. I think this build needs to be tackled very soon, because we just see no flexibility among mage builds at all. It's not worth going into burst because you can't burst the enemy mage anymore, and you basically can only target out the hunters with anything, so you're kind of forced to build the same as the enemy mage in almost any situation, and that's just boring, and I don't think many people want that. And with that, thank you guys for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell, it really helps me out. See you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth out. So I actually figured out my demonetization issue, and it was my outro. As such, feel free to click any of the links around here right now. There will be new outro music as soon as I find something nice. Until then, as you guys requested, I will do the outro music myself. You're welcome.